But what does that leave someone with? Just do good deeds and they'll change each day and be
No, what is really required in any spiritual journey is more and more impartially to look at oneself. What calls me, what stands in my way, what interferes. In fact, this slightly surprises me. You can read the Bhagavad Gita or read the Yoga Sutras or read any of the spiritual texts from India, including the remarks of the Buddha. Strong emphasis on self observation. Different words get used: self knowledge, self observation, self study, etc. So don't get stuck with one expression. But sadly, you can look at the concordance of the whole Bible. There is not a single entry under self study.
hmm,
But a non canonical gospel, Gospel of Thomas, actually says, I'm more or less quoting from memory, Kingdom of God is within you and without you. If you would know God, you must know yourself. When you know yourself, you will realize that you are the Son of God.
Ravi Ravindra, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm happy to join you, sir, to have an exchange with a fellow searcher.
Thank you. Since the last time we've spoken, I've read a handful of your books, and I will be linking them below, which includes Blessed by the Mysterious Grace, which is your autobiography, but you have an interesting story about the title. Would you share that with us?
Yes, well, I had initially actually titled this as Blessed by Undeserved Grace, but the publisher did not like that because that doesn't sound nice to them. They think I deserve it.
Right.
I don't believe I deserve it because, in any case, it was certainly mysterious. And,
It was. I guess we never know when we're growing up and coming into our own in our life, in our different capacities of our life, whether we're worthy of the things that we achieve or that are brought to us or that come to us, or if it's just by happenstance.
and also, really, among three or four of the important people that I have described there, whom I met, like Krishnamurti or Jean the Salesman or the Zen masters, I had never met them earlier. I run into them somewhat accidentally.
Yes.
And even that, what we use it the word accident, but there are all kinds of, we constantly forget there are all kinds of universal forces running the whole universe. I did not create myself any more than you created yourself.
Right.
All those vast energies have created us and they're running the whole universe. So it may even be that one of those, we sometimes call them gods or angels or whatever, but those are just labels. But these energies are very subtle and certainly quite different from what I can control or
Mm.
predict. And maybe they had it in their mind that I need to evolve a little bit, not remain as stupid as I was or I am. And therefore, they want me to meet with some of these wise people, and
Yes,
they are in situations like this. Mm.
I think so. When I look back sometimes if I'm thinking about just anything in general. How did I get this teacup? And then you think you were at a certain store, but why did you go to that store? Because
Yeah.
somebody told you to go. And how did you meet that person? And it was 12 steps back that something happened to meet that person. So everything is connected along the way in
Yeah.
some way, connecting dots to get you to a certain place and a certain point.
Yeah,
And
I even occasionally ask myself and ask my friend, why should I be born in India? And
right,
then why not in Timbuktu? Um, and why should I have these parents or these
right.
brothers and sisters? And this is not my decision. I mean, there are many forces that are at play. In fact, that
Right.
was a question which very early on somehow always stuck with me. Even in high school, I remember occasionally asking my fellow students, why am I here? What has created me? You know, these questions were really there for very early in my life. Somehow it was never very clear to me why I should be born here rather than there, and I should be living here, and then why I should be living at all. I mean, I didn't create create
Right.
myself. That's obvious.
Right. In your autobiography, Blessed by Mysterious Grace, you actually are telling that story, how your friends would call you, your name was Why Am I Here? Or something like
Yeah,
something, because you
yeah.
repeated the question so often that was became your nickname.
That's right. Especially in the physics department, where the fellow students were studying physics from their point of view, they were not asking this question. To them,
Right.
it seemed very strange. Yeah.
How,
But
you've been straddling the modern physics world and the Indian spiritual world, plus the teachings of Gurdjieff. And how is it, or when in early childhood did you start questioning that there's something greater here that would place you with these parents in this country, in this religion, with a mind or a brain that has the capacity for physics over art, for example?
actually, there were a couple of things which had an effect, sometimes very directly, sometimes sort of indirectly. One was a youth, there was an organization for young people, and their main motto, which was in Sanskrit actually, but I'll tell you this in English, was
Thank you.
wandering one gathers honey.
Hmm.
That was their
Interesting.
motto. And so I often then ask myself, wandering in what sense? Only physically wandering around or even intellectually wandering around? And that one gathers honey. So for me,
Hmm.
this was always a bit of a reminder not to feel now I know or this is
Right.
the place. Hmm? And that I needed to wander, not in the sense of just going around, but being somewhat interested in what other traditions or other teachings have to bring. So,
Hmm.
and then another thing that very much influenced me quite early on, we have a very classical text in the Indian spiritual tradition, Shatpat Brahman, where it says that right at birth, we owe many debts. One is the debt to the devas or the angels or God, one might say, and the debt to the sages, and debt to the parents, and
For
debt to
sure.
the society, which somehow struck me that I owe these debts. But then I used to ask myself, are the sages only the ones born in India? Why not the sages outside? Why not Christ? Why
Right.
not Socrates? You may have even read some of these things I actually mention in my book.
Yes.
Because for me, I think something which is mentioned or said 3,000 years ago, they were not necessarily traveling all over the world. They were not necessarily even always aware of other cultures and other civilizations. But in the modern times, I mean, it's obvious that India is not the only country. There are many other countries, and they have different attitudes sometimes or different looks. After all, you and I look differently from each other right from birth.
Yeah.
So for me, these kind of classical expressions, actually, both of them very classical, but even as a kid, when I say a kid, certainly as a teenager, I used to be struck by these questions and then wondering how one connects with them. So that's partly part of my background, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, I think one of your books is titled Pilgrim Without Boundaries, and it plays into that whole idea of the wandering for the honey, and
Yes, yes.
that you're not bound by your own culture and your own language.
No, because everything has its limitations. I often remind my friends the Buddha was speaking to people of Hindu background and in the language called Pali. Christ is speaking to people of Jewish background in the language called Aramaic. So the languages are different. And what gets expressed in Pali sometimes emphasizes something slightly differently than what gets emphasized in Aramaic.
Mm,
So one has to, we need the language, but actually the Gospel of Philippi, in fact, explicitly says this. The language is needed, but language creates a problem.
That's correct.
So we need to be very careful about not getting stuck with one expression or one way of saying something. And I personally feel that the Buddhists and Christians may not get along with each other, but if the Buddha were to meet Christ anywhere, they will embrace each other with love.
I
I
believe
have
that.
absolutely no doubt in my mind about
Yeah.
this. Hmm.
When you have that higher realization, there is no dichotomy of us and them and me and you. It's just one in love
Yes, very
because
much.
we are all each other.
Exactly. In fact, if you look at any of the great sages, whosoever we would call great sages in any culture, what is always more or less emanating from them is first of all a feeling of love and compassion
Hmm.
and a sense of oneness with everybody. They are not that I am separate or I am different and that I am more important. And a sense of service, wishing to serve something. Rather than gaining something more or acquiring something more. So to me, it seems that these are the marks of somebody who is, we would call internally or spiritually developed or enhanced. But if we just generally look at mankind or humanity, or including myself, most of the time one is just self occupied. Where am I? What can I gain? Am I appreciated or am I? All that kind of nonsense goes on the whole time. So, whosoever we call a wise person or a sage or spiritually enhanced, different labels get attached to this. They have a very different attitude. In fact, I remember a remark once having a conversation with Krishnamurti about this. He said, a rose does not decide to smell like a rose.
Right.
We recognize the rose from its fragrance. So a sage doesn't decide to smell or speak like a sage.
Yeah.
We recognize somebody as a. It was rather an interesting comment. A rose does not decide to smell like a rose.
It is what it is, you
Yes.
know. But
Yeah.
this actually brings up a nice contradiction within, well, of the difference between a sage and an intellectual, for example, because many sages weren't intellectual, they weren't knowledgeable in school and education. They were quite uneducated
Right.
from a scholastic perspective.
Yeah.
They just got an inner knowing and a knowledge download kind of.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that many scholars that I have met and that I know and who write a lot of books on spirituality and religion are in their head, and it's a lot of ego play. Whereas the deeply spiritual people that I've met are not so much in their head and more in their heart, and the ego is usually left out.
Now, that is true. That is really partly the whole meaning of somebody being spiritually evolved. It
Mm,
is more and more freedom from one's ego.
yeah,
Or since you are from USA, I could even say more and more freedom from the American dream.
yeah, for sure. Yes,
But that doesn't mean that they are against the American dream,
right.
but they are not stuck with it.
Hmm.
Some of them, like Aurobindo, was a very great writer, a great poet. But Raman, we have a great sage in India called Raman, who was not a scholar or anything. He did not write anything. He hardly read anything. The only one book he read was the Bible. People often don't realize this.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, in a way, but something that comes out of them is coming from a direct perception
Mm,
rather than by conception of one kind or the other. So in fact, I feel this is the overall movement is from conception to perception
hmm.
and direct perception. Then, of
Right.
course, some people are scholarly. For example, Nagarjuna or Shankara, they could write. So there is no Plotinus will be another good example among the various Greek philosophers. Plotinus strikes me always as the one who also actually practiced something.
Hmm.
rather than just talk about it.
Right.
And
Right.
otherwise, one is philosophy just basically means having argument and winning an argument. And
That was something else I enjoyed that you shared in your autobiography. You was just being dissatisfied with the philosophy department because they're
yeah,
just arguing points with each other instead of trying to come to a deeper understanding and advancing understanding,
yeah.
you know. And then there was a class on how to win an argument, you said.
A class, a course was set up like this, how to win an
Right.
argument. Now they have removed it, but for a few years it was there, how to win an argument. So you see that, at least from that point of view, in the scientific world, there are some perceptions, although those measurements are made by instruments, not by human beings, and they are externally oriented. Whereas the perception that is emphasized by the sages is inside. Look within. You are the Buddha. Or even Christ remarked, the kingdom of God is within you or inside you. It gets expressed not very often in the Christian tradition, sadly, but
Yeah.
at least once in the Bible you can find this.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's a very different attitude, really, very much.
Yeah. I think one of the core things that runs through your work in your books and also in the many talks that you've given that religion is not spirituality and the kind of structure of religion has actually oppressed spiritual growth. And I'm paraphrasing, of course. So if you'd
That,
like to comment.
that is sadly true, is not because I said it, but look at, there are at present, the numbers seem to vary depending on who is quoting the numbers, but there seem to be approximately 3 billion Christians in the world. How many of them are practicing anything that Christ brought?
Yeah.
Similarly, there are about 1 billion Hindus. How many of them are practicing what Krishna taught?
Mhm.
Same thing is true with every other religion. The moment it gets organized, more organized a religion is, less it is actually practicing something
Right.
and more just trying to convey certain basic, not basic ideas, basic things you must follow, you must agree to. And then even, for example, especially in the Roman Catholic Church, you have to actually say extra ecclesiam nulla salus. Outside this church, there is no salvation.
Mhm.
Now, so is the Buddha burning in hell?
Right.
No. I mean,
Right.
I find this kind of remark just so sectarian that one needs to be really free of it. If you have had the maybe fortune or blessing to meet people from coming from very different cultural or religious backgrounds and seeing how remarkable they were. For example, these Zen masters that I met, that I described, one from Japan, one from Korea, and Madame de Salzman, who in my judgment was the most exalted human being that I have ever encountered.
Mhm.
And she was born in Switzerland and then lived in Russia, lived in France, etc. So she was not Indian, my kind of Indian,
Right.
but that doesn't mean that a sage has to be only from India. I mean, that would be completely crazy idea.
I think I listened to an audiobook that you had recorded, or a long recording, audio recording of your time with Madame de Salzman.
Yes, heart without measure. Yeah.
Yes, yes, I really enjoyed that quite a bit.
You see, when she passed away, I was asked by some friends to write down some of the things that I learned from her. And the only title I could think of was Heart Without Measure,
Mm,
because she had such an enormous, subtle combination of wisdom as well as love. Many
wow.
people have a lot of knowledge and wisdom, but not love. And some have a lot of love, but they don't know very much about something. But she had a very subtle combination of the two. I was very impressed by her.
I remember some of the parts of that where you were saying how she would invite you to come visit her wherever she was if you
Yes,
needed to talk, and she
yeah,
was always made herself available to you.
yeah. Even when it was very late at night, and she, of course, was highly regarded, and many people wanted to meet her, and she was in many meetings, etc. But at least in my experience, hardly anybody actually in the Gurdjieff teaching can even believe it that I had probably 100 meetings with her, most of them
Yes.
private, but some with other people around. And because she never, in any sense, refused to meet with me. In fact, my instructions from her was whenever I went to France, every year for about 10 years, I used to go to France for about 3 to 4 weeks. And her instruction was that every morning I should phone her and then she can tell me when she can meet me.
Wow.
And on one morning, think I was trying to be, believe it or not, trying to be nice in my own way. I knew she was very busy, so I thought maybe I won't bother her today. So I didn't phone her. And next time when I called her, she gave me hell. Why did you not call? I'm quoting her now. I have the freedom to say no, but you must call.
Oh,
So I had after that no freedom not to
no.
call.
Right. That's it's almost like and I will jump forward to the Korean Zen master later, but I see a kind of parallel because without giving that story away yet, he mentioned that there were possibly a karmic connection between the two of you, and
Yes.
maybe Madame de Salzman felt that she was karmically tied to having to help you, because I don't think she was like that with all of the students or followers. That she couldn't have been able to live her life if she was that way.
No, I agree. In fact, hardly any of the many people who have been involved with the Gurdjieff teaching, which gets called the work, many people involved in this had very much wanted to meet her, and many of them living in Paris, where she was living, did not even know where she was living. Many people, very senior people. So no,
Yeah.
no, I think it is true. But she must have felt that I needed something, and she was generously helping me very
Yeah.
much.
That's wonderful. Again, a sage or a mystic moving from the heart, you know, and that comes across in those stories and on that audio recording.
Yes.
Um, one thing that when I think about the difference between, I grew up Protestant until I was able to tell my parents I don't want to go to church anymore, you know. And I love the beauty of the churches, and the music is nice, but I just felt like everything was a play and it was just false. My grandmother on my father's side was very religious. She was Catholic, and she was a member of the church, and she was a member of the committees of the church, and she would yell and kick and curse it and talk down about people. And I just thought, well, yeah, she needs to be in the church, but she certainly is not embracing the teachings of Jesus. Uh, but whenever I've met someone who is wiser and moving from the heart, they've all had a direct experience of the divine in some way, rather than just schooling or memorization of texts or
Yes.
reading. And I always, as a young kid, felt drawn to the mystic's path more than a religious path, for example. The
Yeah.
religions didn't, no matter what religion, didn't interest me as much as having experiences or searching for that experience, whatever it would be, even though I've read about all the different, not every religion, of course, but many of the religions and mystics. And I want to quote something here in The Yoga of Christ, which is one of your books. Actually, it's called The Yoga of the Christ, and I'll hold it up here.
Mm.
Um, in the Gospels according to St. John, who is one of your favorite Gospels that you've read many, many times in the Bible. And then you wrote another book, The Gospel of John in the Light of Indian Mysticism, which is another very interesting book.
By the way, it's actually essentially the same book, but this might surprise you. That book has been translated into what 13, 14 languages. But some of the publishers did not want to use the word yoga and Christ in the
Oh,
same title. I actually still have a letter from the Greek publisher written to
oh
me in
no,
1991 saying
the
if he uses
Orthodox
the word
country.
yoga and Christ in the same title, the church will burn his publishing house down.
That's correct. Yes.
Now, to be sure, since then, yoga has become much more popular. Maybe they will accept it now.
Yeah.
But in USA also, they did not want to use the original title, which is the Yoga of the Christ. That's
Ah,
the original title.
yeah.
And so they changed the title to, well, first of all, they actually published it as Christ the Yogi. They
Ah,
published it. It's the
that's
same book.
interesting.
So I objected to that. Then they said when they finished selling those, they had published a few thousand copies. Then they changed the title to The Gospel of John in the Light of Indian Mysticism. So
Okay.
if you have read the other one, you don't need to really reread it. It's basically the same.
Okay. My mother had books on Buddha when I was a kid, 8, 9, 10 years old, Buddhism and yoga and Raja Yoga and the I Ching and different things. And she used to always say, Christ disappeared for 7 years and he went to India and learned yoga. But what I find is interesting is that the Kriya Yoga tradition, Christ portrait up with all of their masters, and past masters.
Yes. How can one really not appreciate the teaching of Christ? Anybody who reads it, it's obvious that love is oozing out of him.
Yes.
All his expressions have the word love in them practically. And all his life he lived like that. So it seems to me it is almost absurd not to recognize the grandeur of this person, but to imagine that he's the only incarnation of God. Why get stuck with that idea? I mean, God has produced many wise people. For example, the Buddha is also quite wise. Why to imagine that only Christ is the only incarnation or the only Son of God? So in a way, but certainly it is very strong notion in India that Christ actually died in India in the state called Kashmir. The capital of Kashmir is Srinagar. There his grave is there. In fact, I have
Hmm.
visited it there. So as far as they're concerned, he obviously had occult powers. He could even being so-called crucified, he could move away from that. Or even if externally he's being crucified, but internally he could move away. And then that he actually died in India, that's very strong
Hmm.
part of this tradition. And his grave is there in Srinagar. And
That's interesting.
yeah,
So in the Yoga of the Christ, you write, I'm going to quote a sentence here, two sentences. The purpose of spiritual discipline is not self-improvement, but transformation. We ask not merely to become better versions of ourselves, but to participate in a higher order of being. That's quite uh, disciplined. And we were talking about having spiritual discipline because you're looking for transformation, which takes time, and you
right.
have to hold the line too in your heart and in your mind to be able to move towards that and wait for that transformation and
Yeah.
hope that it comes. Um, what is changing in the human being during this process of transformation, or how does it begin?
It actually begins by first of all realizing, in a way, everybody would recognize this. Nobody could possibly deny it. That whatever in my case is called Ravi, this character is here only temporarily. And furthermore, Ravi did not create himself. That's quite obvious. And so he may be here for, at the maximum, let's say 100 years. Hmm? If that is very bad for my grandchildren, if I live that long. But the fact is that I'm here temporarily in this body. For some people, they have fatter bodies, some have thinner bodies, some are taller, some are short. Did I decide any of this?
No
Hmm.
way.
So, therefore, to realize that there are very strong, mysterious forces which are creating which have created me, but they have created everybody else. In fact, the whole universe. And then, but I am here only temporarily, not to imagine that I am here permanently, forever. And therefore, it raises a obvious question, why am I here? And why have I been created? Also, what forces are there which have created me? For personally, for me, this is more or less really the starting point. In fact, in the Indian tradition, this who am I is called the Bij Prashna, meaning the seed question.
Mm,
So it begins from there to find out. I personally think what am I is probably a better way of translating it
mhm,
rather than who am I. But it doesn't matter either way. And there, I think, if you don't mind, I need to make a little linguistic point here. What is required from our side is attention. Hmm? And in fact, you had even wondered that we should speak a little bit about attention. The trouble is with the language. You see the difference between awareness and attention.
mm,
I am paying attention or I am aware of something. When I am paying attention, it's all coming from me.
mhm,
If I am aware of something, it's also coming from somewhere else, which I'm receiving. Then, in addition to this, I would like furthermore to add another word, consciousness. If I am conscious of something, what does it mean? That I am not only aware of it, but in some way I am allowing this to pervade my whole organism a little bit. Consciousness, this is a very classical idea. Actually, even in the modern scientific world, there is a revolution against the very materialist science, as if everything comes from the material matter. Consciousness cannot exist without matter, is the fundamental idea of modern science, starting
mhm,
from the 16th century. But it is being questioned now, even by something called the Galileo Commission, where we say consciousness is more important and that everything comes from consciousness. And in the Indian tradition, there are four what are called great enunciations. One of them is consciousness is Brahma, meaning consciousness is the ultimate reality. So this consciousness is not in my control, whereas attention is as if it is my attention.
mm. It's ego driven,
That's
right?
right. Mm. So, but to become more conscious or to receive something coming from the side of consciousness requires more and more receptivity from my side.
Mm,
It's a little bit like just a simple reminder. Actually, my teacher, Randa Solomon, said people imagine that they are searching for God. It is the other way around. God is searching for them. But I am running away. I don't let God catch me. And so, what is required from my side, and that's the really meaning of any prayer, that I am praying to receive something coming from God's side. And receptivity requires more and more freedom from me. Physically, it becomes obvious that more and more relaxation.
mm,
Because if you seriously look, don't just take my word for it, at least in my experience, all my tensions arise either from fear or self assertion. So to be more and more free of me. For example, Christ says, unless you leave yourself behind, you cannot be a follower of mine. How do I leave myself behind? That's what I meant by saying leaving the so-called American dream behind. That doesn't mean to be against the American dream, but not to be stuck with it. More power, more money, more prestige, that's
mm,
part of the dream.
right.
That is what we call my achievement, my aggrandizement. And am I being approved? Am I being appreciated or not? So more and more freedom from that is required to be touched by the consciousness coming from above. And that requires, first of all, this is really the reason, a very fundamental requirement, excuse me, fundamental requirement in any serious spiritual teaching, to sit in meditation in as much relaxation as I can possibly manage. Because relaxation means freedom from my fear or my achievement or my assertion. But not only physical relaxation, also emotional relaxation. For example, any kind of fear, etc. And also intellectual relaxation, by which I mean even if I had the combined intelligence of Einstein, Aristotle, Nagarjuna, and Shankara, I still do not know and cannot know all there is to know. So a little freedom from what I know to come to this state. John of the Cross very nicely actually puts it. He's one of my favorite poets from the Spanish language. I came to knowledge by unknowing. This is one of his poems.
Right,
And,
right.
and,
That's great.
yeah. So more and more freedom from what I know. That is not that I need to be ignorant. Nobody is suggesting that. No, knowledge is fine, but freedom from what I know so that I can be surprised.
Mm,
In fact, there is a very strong suggestion, actually, a remark of Christ in Oxyrhynchus. They found it in Egypt, a place called Oxyrhynchus, that when you discover something, you'll be astonished. And one of the Upanishads actually says, unless it is surprising, 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 it cannot be holy.
mm,
Otherwise, it's just coming from my side, from my mind.
right.
Which is why Meister Eckhart, one of my very favorite mystics actually, in fact says, ultimately, of course, in one's search, one begins from where one is. I may be trying to gain something. I want to get to heaven. I want to be enlightened. Fine. So I begin from where I am. But he very much speaks about that ultimately one needs to come to complete poverty. He calls it poverty. I would say complete freedom from me, me, me. Even not to try to do the will of God.
Mm,
Because I just imagine what God is. I don't know what God is.
right.
Hmm? And what is the will of God? Somewhere deep down, I have a feeling if I fulfill the will of God, maybe I can get to heaven or something. You see? So he actually says ultimately complete poverty, not even trying to do the will of God. Hmm?
Wow.
It's quite a remarkable call in a way.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
We started this little segment here that got pretty deep on attention. And in your work on the Yoga Sutras, you said attention is a doorway through which the sacred enters human life. And
Yes.
that plays very well there.
Yes, the word attention gets used commonly, so I use that, but I would actually more and more suggest, in fact, if I were to even rewrite even the Yoga Sutras or the Bhagavad Gita, uh, my own teacher, Jan the Sosman, very frequently used the word attention. So, in a way, not to be against that, but really what, in fact, I recommend more and more is awareness, but that awareness also coming from consciousness.
Mm,
Not my attention, but one could say attention in me, as if some divine energy enters into me. Let me here also remind you of something which I find very helpful personally, and I often remind myself of that. In all ancient languages, certainly in Sanskrit, in Hebrew, and in Greek, this I have checked, the word for breath and for spirit is either exactly the same or very close to each other. Now, what does that mean? I did not create this breathing apparatus. I did not create the air that I need to breathe to stay alive. It's all a benediction.
Mhm.
But if I pay attention to this breath in me, not my breath, but breath in me, is really paying attention to the spirit in me,
Mm.
keeping me alive for a few decades.
How does one cultivate? I would assume we need to cultivate this attention, awareness, and consciousness. I don't think we have, by the time we get to an age where we're thinking about it, I think there's so much conditioning in front of,
Yes.
that it's really hard to pull back or lower those veils. How might one
So,
cultivate that?
well, first of all, even theoretically, to actually see more and more that there are many levels of reality subtler than the mind.
Hmm.
The mind cannot grasp those levels or cannot describe that. For example, even the Buddha could not describe what nirvana is.
Right.
Christ could not describe what is the kingdom of heaven. You know that. His only description, it is like a mustard seed. Now, do you feel clear about this? So the reason I'm saying this, that even the greatest sages who are obviously speaking from direct, real knowledge, they cannot describe these things mentally. Because any mental description then gets stuck and one is trying to control it or try to convince everybody else that this is the only description of heaven, this is the only description of God, etc. So more and more freedom from the mind. In fact, the very first substantial sutra in the Yoga Sutras is yoga is stopping all the movements of the mind. Quieting the mind allows this consciousness to appear in a slightly different way.
Mm.
In fact, this sometimes people are surprised by this, but Madame Blavatsky, who was the founder of the Theosophical Society for 150 years ago, she makes this remark: mind is the slayer of the truth. Because whatever the mind encounters, it wishes to either control it or predict it.
Mm.
Look at the whole scientific world. We don't need to be against it, but to see everything that we can find or measure in the scientific world, right away we want to repeat it or control it or predict it. Which is why you read actually in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, a very interesting situation. You know the story, Arjuna and Krishna are the two
Mm.
characters there. And Krishna, when he shows his great form, it's called the great form, his thousand arms, thousand heads. Interestingly, in the Abrahamic tradition, higher the angel, more wings the angel has. In the Indian tradition, higher the devas, more arms or more eyes they have. Not the angel, not the wings.
Right, right.
It's quite interesting difference. But in any case, when Krishna shows his thousand arms form, this is what Arjuna says: although my heart is glad, but my mind is afraid.
Yes, yes.
Therefore, resume your previous form. You see, the mind is always wishing to control whatever it encounters.
Mm.
Heart can be glad, it can be touched by something, which is why very strong suggestion, as far as I can understand, in all spiritual teachings, more to rely on what the heart feels. In
Mm.
fact, even a very famous scientist, Blaise Pascal, you know, this is his remark, I'm more or less quoting it from memory. Heart has reasons that reason does not know. Heart can be touched by something, and then it is difficult to describe it even mentally. Even some of the great sages who have received the touch of God are unable to describe what it is there is. because description requires language, requires the mind coming in here, and it already gets lower and lower and lower, which is why by the time something is organized, it's already at a much lower level of what's happening.
Well, when we just think about love and the feeling you get on first new love, how
Yeah,
it takes you 3 hours to describe it to your friend because it's just this massive feeling you're trying to structure into a thought and those thoughts into words, into
yeah,
sentences, right? And we're talking about something
yeah,
even bigger. Wow,
yeah.
indeed.
Actually, interesting remark of Einstein. Gravitation cannot explain how one falls in love.
That's clever. That's,
This is Einstein's remark, not my remark.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very good.
Gravitation cannot explain how one falls in love.
It's yes, the most brilliant mind in science can't figure out love. Speaking of love, in Heart Without Measure, that's the segue, heart. You said that a higher consciousness produces a new body, but equally a new body is needed for connecting with higher consciousness. That's like a catch 22.
Yes.
How do we circumnavigate that?
No, but this is actually the case in every situation that, for example, if one is on a journey, you take a few steps, then the direction of the journey or the call can change.
Mm,
When you follow, then it changes your steps in which direction you go. So there is always a spiral. Really, any spiritual undertaking, what I understand today almost guaranteedly will be different if I don't give up my journey.
mhm.
It'll be different in a few years. In
Yeah,
fact, even when I wrote this book on the Bhagavad Gita, I actually say there that don't get stuck with my commentary. If I were to write a commentary 6 years later, I'm certain it'll be different from what I'm writing now. Hmm?
indeed.
Because otherwise, nothing is growing in me in the next 6 years. Hmm? But how one understands a remark of Christ or remark of the Buddha depends on the quality of the receiver. Every member of the mafia reads the same gospel as John the Cross or Meister Eckhart. The gospel is not different, the readers are different. So, therefore, to allow the possibility that the quality of the reader can actually change, and then the same remarks of Christ or the Buddha would invite a slightly different understanding, a different response than they do now. Which is why I quoted earlier Meister Eckhart saying, ultimately, complete poverty. Hmm? Not even wanting to do the will of God. Because what I understand is the will of God depends on my present understanding.
Right. But what does that leave someone with? Just do good deeds and they'll change each day and be
No, what is really required in any spiritual journey is more and more impartially to look at oneself. What calls me, what stands in my way, what interferes. In fact, this slightly surprises me. You can read the Bhagavad Gita or read the Yoga Sutras or read any of the spiritual texts from India, including the remarks of the Buddha. Strong emphasis on self observation. Different words get used: self knowledge, self observation, self study, etc. So don't get stuck with one expression. But sadly, you can look at the concordance of the whole Bible. There is not a single entry under self study.
mm,
But a non canonical gospel, Gospel of Thomas, actually says, I'm more or less quoting from memory, Kingdom of God is within you and without you. If you would know God, you must know yourself. When you know yourself, you will realize that you are the Son of God. But if you do not know yourself, you are in poverty. In fact, you are poverty. It's a very strong statement. It's in the Gospel of Thomas. You can read it there. So self-study or self-knowledge is absolutely important part of the journey. But there is a danger. There are two main dangers. One is fantasy. Oh, I'm specially chosen by God. I should kill all the infidels. You see that
Yes.
kind of fantasy? The other one is a very great fear because, in principle, according to all the spiritual teachers, in fact, even contemporary modern science would agree, in principle, the whole cosmos is mirrored inside each one of us. So I have not only the divine energy in me, the God is there also, but so is the devil. So self-study or self-awareness, self-knowledge can show the devil in me, and that creates a fear. In fact, Rumi, one of the Sufi sages, in fact makes, this is a direct quote from Rumi, if you have not yet seen the devil, go look in the mirror.
Yeah.
So the devil is also there. Therefore, self-study is an important, necessary enterprise, but a little risky and dangerous, which is the reason why very strong emphasis, it's very much emphasized in the Gurdjieff teaching, in Buddhism, and in Sufism, any practical teacher, to undertake spiritual practices in the company of fellow searchers. Because then one begins to see that the devil is not only in me, it is also in everybody else. It was even in the Buddha, even in Christ. Remember, Christ was also tested by Satan, and Christ didn't ask him to go to hell or to disappear. You can read this in the Gospel of Matthew. Get thee behind me, Satan. Help from behind. Satan has a lot of energy.
Mhm.
Similarly, the Buddha actually, before his enlightenment, says to Mara, Mara is the Pali word for Satan, Mara, you are a part and parcel of myself. But just to mention this, Mara in Pali and Satan in Hebrew, both of them actually mean obstacle.
Mm.
So when I face the Satan, I see what stands in my way. What's my obstacle? So it is very important to actually face the Satan. But if I am just by myself, it can be frightening. So one says, to hell with it. I don't want to continue with this self-study. So self-study is a very dangerous enterprise, but very necessary. And it is assisted if I undertake any serious practices with the company of fellow searchers.
Mm.
Because then one realizes that Satan is not only in me, it's a general human situation, and that I need to find the proper place for this Satan. Because it is exactly these satanic energies which are making me important in the world.
Right.
So there is no reason to be against that. But if I am just stuck with that part, then I'm not on a spiritual journey. Spiritual journey is not against the success in the world, but it is not stuck with the success in the world. It's not in any sense against it. This is the one of the things which had specially struck me about Gurdjieff teaching. Most of the senior people in the Gurdjieff teaching were involved in, they were medical doctors or had businesses, they were not against any of this, but hoping and trying not to be stuck with that.
Mhm.
Otherwise, there is a strong tendency, particularly got emphasized in the Indian tradition, as if you should just leave the world, go to the Himalayas and meditate, or go into a monastery, that otherwise there is no possibility of this. In fact, early Buddhism very strongly emphasized that nobody in the world could come to nirvana unless they go to a monastery.
Mm.
Later, this was called Hinayana Buddhism, meaning small boat Buddhism. That word is not used anymore. It is now called Theravada Buddhism, meaning teaching of the elder Buddhists. Now, so then it shifted 500 years after that to Mahayana Buddhism, great boat, that one could even be a household worker and still come to nirvana.
Mm.
That was the major change brought by Nagarjuna, actually, very major shift. And so I think it is true that working with other fellow searchers can assist one not to be completely frightened by the devil or to be tempted by the devil. The devil is not only just frightening you, he's also tempting you. And so in both cases, it's an obstacle. But I feel more and more not to be against the obstacle, but to recognize it and to see how I can be free of it. So I am always very struck by this remark of Christ: "Get thee behind me, Satan." You don't need to take my word for it. You can look in the Bible. Hmm?
Yes. It's, if the devil is part of us and if it's the ego, or the nafs, as they say in Sufism or Islam, you have
Yeah.
to put everything in its proper place, and that goes behind love and gratitude and and other things.
A remark of my teacher, Jean de Salzman, which I find very helpful. In fact, I more or less repeat it to myself practically every day.
Um,
He said, "Ego is a good servant, but a bad master."
for sure. Yes. Yes.
As long as it is serving something, it's fine. Who
Mhm.
do you think Christ did not have a strong ego? Or the Buddha did not have a strong ego? How the hell could they even go out and sit there like 49 days, 49 nights, or
Right.
with the devil without a strong ego? Ego simply means the self. People often forget this. The word ego has now, since the beginning of 20th century, because of Freud, etc., it has been associated with the lowest level of the self. Literally, it simply means the self in Greek, the word ego, also in Latin. For example, this remark of Christ, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," it is ego eimi. It begins with
Mm.
ego, I am. So ego simply means I. But as I said, since the beginning of the 20th century, because of the psychologist's writing, it has become more or less selfish self.
Mm.
But that ego can be selfless. Occasionally, I am surprised, almost surprised by my own action, occasionally, that I acted completely selflessly. Not very often, but occasionally. But also, on the other hand, acting completely selfishly. So the self has many different levels. And the call is to purify this self so that the small s self can become one with the capital S self.
Mm.
That's the call. And that capital S self, especially emphasized in the Indian tradition, is the same as God. That is actually
The
called the
Atman.
Atman.
Mm.
That's called the supreme identity in the Indian tradition. That the subtlest part of your Atman or yourself or soul is identically the same as Brahma, the highest level. That's the supreme identity. The call is to actually come to that supreme identity in fact, not simply repeating the words. Even a fool like myself can repeat these words. That's easy. Hmm. But
Yes.
actually come to that clarity, to that understanding. Therefore, naturally, love and compassion oozes out of one and a sense of service, sense of oneness.
Hmm.
So,
Indeed.
yes.
Gurdjieff talked about developing higher bodies, and I wonder if is this a similar thing to higher states of consciousness, or um, or something different?
No, I think much the same, but expressed, if you like, more biologically or more
Mm.
materially. Hmm? As if within, in fact, this is a very classical idea in Indian tradition, more emphasized in Tibetan Buddhism, but in the whole of the Indian tradition, that we have different bodies in us. For example, when one is asleep and dreaming, is it the usual Ravi who is doing this, or is it a different body? And then sometimes when there is no dream at all, complete sleep, is this a different body? So it gets expressed as if perceptions under those states. For example, especially actually in the Bible, you see many occasions like this. So and so had a dream and he saw, or the three magi coming, or this. How do they know that Christ is there born there? So that gets expressed as if these subtle bodies, which is a different level of consciousness, can be aware of things happening even at different places. Especially in the Yoga Sutra, very strong emphasis that one cultivates what we would call occult powers, but a strong suggestion not to get stuck with them because otherwise one forgets the journey is beyond the occult powers. In
Right.
fact, Krishnamurti, I remember often speaking with him, many people said that he had many occult powers. He could even heal somebody who was sick just by touching them.
Hmm.
And on one occasion, in fact, he and I were just going for a walk. I don't know, maybe I had asked a question, I don't remember this now, but he turned to me and he says, they say that K, he often referred to himself as K, meaning Krishnamurti, that K had some occult healing powers. So I said, did you? He smiled, didn't want to say very much about it. But it's absolutely clear that there were cases in which he could actually heal somebody just by touching them.
Hmm.
And I'm absolutely certain that the Buddha or Christ had all kinds of occult powers. Certainly, Patanjali describes this very clearly in the third chapter of the Yoga Sutra. How many occult powers? And then, but he then says very strongly that it can be a temptation.
Right. You can't get stuck on them, the cities,
That's right.
right? You have
Siddhi.
to move beyond them. You
Yeah.
know, they're a signpost on the way of advancement, but don't stop there and stay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in a certain way, I often remind people that siddhis, of course, one thinks occult in the sense they are not usual, they are not common. But really, if you look at some wonderful musician or a great scientist or a great philosopher, they obviously have something more occult than I have.
Yes.
So occult powers need not be understood as if they are totally out of this world. They are just different qualities, different levels. So almost certainly, many people, particularly I'm sure that Krishna or Buddha or Christ, in fact, in contemporary times, many people have said about Raman, who was a great sage in India, that he had all kinds of occult powers. People who were sick or something would come to him and bow to him, and he would just simply touch them. He wasn't trying to claim that he had occult powers or anything. In fact, one of the remarks, one of the features of sages is they never claim to have any of these great powers. Christ never said, I can fix everything.
Right.
He repeatedly says that I simply, even those words I'm using are not my words, they are actually what I have heard from the Father.
Yeah.
Hmm?
So these cities or occult powers, they fall still within the cosmic law that you've spoken about and written about many times.
Yes,
And it's interesting. I found it interesting that you said even the Hindu gods were subject to the cosmic laws.
yes,
And what role do those laws play in our own spiritual practice? Like, do we have to know what, is it good for us to know what they are to help us
yes.
move
Because
along? Mhm.
I think if we, using just external terminology, if we can actually begin to even theoretically, first of all, acknowledge that I have both the presence of God in me as well as the presence of the Satan in me, then I begin to realize that these various powers are a subtle combination of these two forces,
Mm,
and that occult powers can lead one, if I get so attached to it, then the Satan basically takes over.
yeah.
Hmm.
So it's
But Satan also has a lot of power. There is no question. In fact, there is a remark of actually Mao Zedong I happened to read many years ago, which struck me very much, which actually conveys this very nicely. He said, when the tiger has left the mountain, the monkey becomes the king.
yes.
Hmm? So you see, we have the divine power in us as well. But if we get so stuck with the demonic power, which is also there, then the demon becomes the king.
Mm,
Hmm? This is the reason why all serious teachers, they don't deny occult powers, that they exist. Patanjali very clearly says that. On the other hand, strong suggestion not to get stuck with them, to keep searching for subtler and subtler level.
mm.
But
No, please.
recognizing that the whole universe is in me means both the divine as well as demonic powers are in me,
Mm,
in everybody.
mm. And in the greater world, in the of the universe of God or consciousness, there's no time, right? Space time is our own
Yeah, I saw.
understanding of things.
Yeah, yeah,
And so it shouldn't take any time at all to realize this because it's always in the present moment. We
yes.
just need to find a way to realize
Yeah.
it in the moment.
I was actually very struck by a remark of Saint Augustine. This is
Mm,
hardly an ordinary character in the Christian tradition. He says, as long as nobody asks me what time is, I'm very clear what time is. But the moment somebody asks me, I have no idea what time is. This is St. Augustine.
right,
Time is a very mysterious force, really, by itself. And,
right.
uh,
Wow.
but it is true, very strong suggestion, particularly emphasized in the Indian tradition, but also in the Abrahamic tradition, that one can be timeless or free of time sequence.
Mm,
In fact, Yogastra especially says that the real knowledge is free of, the Sanskrit word is kraman, meaning time sequence. It is
mm,
free of time sequence. So that the Buddha was free of time sequence, but they are not against the sequence of time. He could be aware of past actions, present actions, future actions. So they are not against the time sequence, but they are not stuck in it, basically. They're free of it.
there was something that I read that you pointed out the original meaning of repentance is metanoia. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah,
Meta-
metanoia. Yeah,
Metanoia, which means a
yeah,
radical turning or reorientation.
yeah. It gets translated as repentance,
Right.
but it really is 180-degree turn.
Hmm.
Because repentance, it's also, it is true that I feel bad about it. I'm repenting that I behaved like that. But then that expression just keeps you stuck there. Hmm? But if you remember that it means now I make a 180-degree turn,
Hmm.
that has a different call, at least. So I feel that the word metanoia really should not be simply translated as repentance.
Hmm.
But that's the common translation of it in the whole Bible. Any trans, as you know, there are many translations of the Bible. Even the
Yes.
Catholics have a different translation than the Protestants, and the English and the American.
Yeah.
So metanoia is really turning around.
Turning around.
Yeah,
So it's
thank
a
you.
real change of behavior, a change of outlook, not just saying I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
right? It's
Change
really
of
changing your orientation, I would
That's
think.
right. Yeah,
Right. In your work on the Gospel of John, you you said that being born from above is a central idea, and that it's pointing to like how we, I don't know, speak of awakening or transformation.
That's the remark of Christ. It's in
Yeah.
third chapter of John when
Mm,
Nicodemus, who was a rule, literally the word Nicodemus means ruler of men.
mm,
He was a member of the Sanhedrin, which actually decided to kill Christ, crucify him. That was the Sanhedrin, was the council. But he comes in the middle of the night, trying to escape from the council, asking Christ, how can one get to heaven? Basically, is really what he's asking. And Christ's remark is very important. You have to be born from above, born of the Spirit.
mm. From above. Okay.
Above meaning, so it's not like a biological birth. In fact, a very strong suggestion, as far as I know, by all the spiritual sages, that obviously each one of us has a biological birth, otherwise you and I won't exist. But that to have a spiritual birth is, and that there is a very strong suggestion that that is actually quite natural. Usually, between, let us say, it's slightly different for females than for males, but for males, usually between the ages of 16 to 26 or so, there is all kinds of sexual energy. One is trying to find a sexual partner. We can either call it marriage or not, that's a different matter. And then to get a good job so I can have a nice living, etc., etc. But that usually after that, and particularly around the age of 40 or so, internally there is a wish for a spiritual birth. Sadly, what has been done, especially in USA, they just call it the midlife crisis.
Right. Right.
It's actually not it's the wrong way of putting it. It's actually searching for a divine birth or a spiritual birth. Sadly, because you can read it, you don't need to take my word for it. Some people who have made even millions of dollars, sometimes at a certain age, they begin to wonder what's going to happen. I'm going to die. So something, and some of them give up their jobs or go to a monastery or this or that. But very few people, because the companies where they are working are very eager to keep them because they have done very well for them. So they can even arrange for them to meet nice young girls now so they don't have the midlife crisis. So this is a tragedy, but really otherwise that it is quite normal for human beings to have not only the biological birth, otherwise we won't exist, but then to have a spiritual birth, that it is a natural call in each person. But it culturally can be shifted or changed or not understood. And generally, the notion, for example, in the Indian tradition, classically speaking, first 25 years, you are learning, education, etc., etc. Next 25 years, you're earning money, keeping the family, taking care of the family. Then the next 25 years, you actually become a little free and take care of the society. And then the next 25 years, you become essentially a monastic, hmm, just meditating. Now, I don't know how many people in India actually carry this out, but this is the classical way of putting it. Four different stages of one's life. Each one
Makes
is
sense.
associated 25 years.
Yeah. I'd like to talk just a little bit about Krishnamurti. So
Then
they've groomed him to be the next world sage, so to
that's right.
speak.
Yeah.
And
Any
the
best.
and the Theosophical Society was, of course, the group that was going to be responsible for bringing this great world leader, this great sage and teacher. And then at the moment when it was going to happen, he says, "That's not me. I'm no I'm no great guru. I'm no great sage," which is very admirable to step away from
Yes.
that.
Yes, but I think, first of all, just as a side remark, many people have said they have never, people who were close to him, they have never seen him hug anybody as often as he hugged me. I was surprised to hear
Wow.
this because I don't know that. That is true.
Yeah,
But certainly he hugged me many times.
that's wonderful.
That is certainly true. But I think he actually said to me on one occasion, I did not leave the Theosophical Society. They kicked me out, which is
Yes.
actually true. I asked Radha Barnia, who was the president at that time of the Theosophical Society, whether it was true. And she made some research, and it was actually true. What was happening that at that time, Annie Besant, who was officially the president of the Theosophical Society, but she had gotten quite old and her mind was not working properly. So she was still officially the president, but it was somebody else sort of leading the, um, more or less acting as the president. And it had become a bit of a habit that you follow step number one, two, three, four, then you come to the next stage next. So that is really what Krishnamurti was objecting to very much.
Mhm.
This is why he ended up making this very famous statement: there is no path. Truth is a pathless land, which is a strange thing in a way to say because he himself practiced certain things. So,
Right.
but he was really more making that you have step number one, two, three, four. That's what he's reacting against mostly.
Mm,
And but Krishnamurti's teaching, I think, very strong call to have a clearer and clearer inner perception
mm,
to see, which is really what I said earlier. When self-study sounds easy to use these various words, but in fact, a remark of Krishnamurti, without self-knowledge, there can be no wisdom. This is a
mm,
direct quote from Krishnamurti.
yeah,
Because I need to see what stands in my way, what calls me, and then how can I be free of what is standing in my way? And no, Krishnamurti was a great teacher, there is no question, but somehow some of his remarks, truth is a pathless land, as if no practice is required.
right,
This is silly. He
right.
himself was practicing yoga every day. In fact, his teacher, yoga teacher, Deshagachar, was also my yoga teacher. Hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I know this from him directly. He taught yoga to Krishnamurti, and uh, and he practiced yoga every day. And
So it's interesting that he said, "No, I'm not taking on this responsibility of being the great world teacher," but he became the great world teacher, but on
yeah,
his but on his own terms, you know.
on his own time.
And I
Yes,
really
yes,
enjoy watching his talks. There are so many that are recorded and available online to watch because he looks so dapper, you know, and he's
yeah,
sitting in his chair, and then he'll get like, "Good sir, don't you know?" And he'll get very emotional for a
yes,
moment.
yes,
You can have no fear of something that you don't know
yes,
because it hasn't happened. How would you know?
yes. No, I agree. I think he's a very wise man, and
Yeah.
well, you can, as you have read already, how much appreciation I had with him.
Yes.
In fact, people often don't realize. I quote, mention it there. On one occasion, he made breakfast for me. Did you read that part?
Yes, yes, yes.
My friends are surprised by this. Everybody is surprised by this. I have been blessed by so many great sages. Mm.
Well, that's why the publisher wanted to change the name of your book because somehow you're very deserving of all this, or it wouldn't have you
I don't
wouldn't
know.
it wouldn't have been attracted you wouldn't have attracted it, or they wouldn't have all come to you. I mean, so many great and wise teachers, you know, not all of them well known because I wanted to get to the Korean Zen master. We
Yes.
need to talk about Chulwung Sunim because actually that chapter in your autobiography, Blessed by Mysterious Grace, is so it's like you're watching a film, and
Yes.
because it's so many turns are unexpected in the events of that,
Yes.
and so many things are, it's just almost unbelievable.
Yes.
And then somebody's friend in Canada was your neighbor, and I mean, it's just so many things. I would like for you to tell, if you can, the story you were going to walk up this mountain, and
Yeah.
if you would like to tell the story.
Well, we were just actually, we were advised by one of the Zen masters in Korea to go to some of these monasteries. On one occasion, one of these monasteries we were visiting was very crowded. It was, I think, the 60th birthday of the master of the monastery. I don't remember the reason, but many people were there. So partly to avoid the crowd, we decided to go up the mountain. Not
Hmm.
that we knew anybody up the mountain.
Right.
And then suddenly when we got up there, somebody says, would you like a cup of coffee? And my wife was so addicted to coffee, and for the last few days we had not had any coffee because we
Right.
were in these Zen monasteries. They were not serving coffee. So we obviously were very happy. And this is how it all began. And then we had a little exchange. He showed us many things around, including some lovely paintings in his room, extraordinary paintings. And he then sent somebody to bring an envelope, which he gives to me. And it had seven 100 US dollar notes in it. And my first reaction was maybe he's trying to ask me to do something terrible for him by
Right.
giving me this money. And he says, this is only to pay for your next visit. And if we had more money available, we would have given you more. And nobody would actually even believe that all this was happening, except that my wife was there and a friend of ours was there, two other people. We were all completely surprised by all this. And so the next time, I mean, more than a year later, I did go there. I described more detail. I can't go into all the details here
Yeah.
now. But then he insisted on giving me this image of the Buddha from the 10th century because I was interested in having a Buddha image. And that cost about $15,000.
Right. Now, you
And
had gotten an advance from a foundation for a book. Is that the Science and the Sacred book? That work that you were going to pay for the Buddha head, but the guy wouldn't come down on the price enough.
that's right, the Templeton Foundation.
Templeton Foundation, yeah.
had- yeah, they had given me an award for about $10,000. Which I was willing to pay, but this person who was selling the Buddha image wanted more than that. So then the Zen master himself brought another image of the Buddha from the 10th century. And so I could hardly, I mean, I keep asking him why, but again, because you had done something for me in a previous life. Now, I have no idea what I had done for a previous life.
No.
So he
And
was
he
paying
had
for
given
that.
you a uniform or clothing that matched his.
Yes,
And people were, the disciples were bowing to you in
yes.
the meditation hall.
That's right. I still have that clothing here. And I sometimes feel maybe I should wear it for my morning meditation.
Yeah,
But I sort of keep it more or less as a souvenir, really. And no, I think I I had no idea who this person was. We were not looking for him or anything. But it turned out that the president of South Korea at that time was his disciple. The admiral of Korea was his disciple, and that he had undertaken a vow to stay on that mountain for many years. So, but many of his followers would bring anything that he wanted or needed. Hmm? Lovely images of paintings in his room and all kinds of things, really. And but
that's wonderful.
whatever.
The whole thing about Buddhism is, as I understand it, is we have to work through all of the samskaras and these debts in order to stop the karmic wheel so you can just not have to come back again and just do this all again. But maybe there's something else, that we're in different realms. We get born and we're in different realms of spiritual hierarchy, maybe on our way to rejoining the divine.
Yeah, I think that my impression is that that is the call to everybody, which is why,
Mm,
as I said, my teacher actually says that God is more searching for you then you are searching for God. But basically, you run away. You don't want to be caught by God.
Mm,
And to be caught by Him requires being present, being receptive, not being occupied with what can I achieve, what I can gain, just willing to receive something. Which is why this is really what is the main meaning of the word prayer. But the posture of prayer, looking up, actually interferes with your breathing.
mhm.
So I very strongly recommend to all my friends, and I try to practice it myself as much as I can, to have the attitude of prayer, which is really calling the divine energy to bless me, not trying to grab it, not trying to command it, but to have the posture of meditation, meaning looking deeper and deeper inside and sitting in a way that the energies can move in the body easily without interference. So to find the right posture, deeper and deeper relaxation, and look deeper and deeper within, that is the posture of meditation. But attitude of prayer, receiving something rather than commanding something.
Right. I think a lot of people who are in their ego spaces, they pray for to ask for things for them that are
Yeah.
of this material world. Please let me have the job. Please help my son get into college. Please get the electric bill paid. Please make me lose weight for the summer. You know?
Yes. But even there, I feel one needs to begin precisely from where one is.
Yes.
If that is what I feel I need, and that is what I think God can give me, okay, so I begin my
Mm,
prayer from that. And then gradually something will shift. In fact, let me mention to you, in the Zen practice, a very strong question, which is periodically raised by people, because the Buddha said, fear and desire leads to suffering. And then people ask, isn't desire for nirvana also going to lead to suffering? So the traditional response to that has been very interesting.
mm.
Yes, it can lead to suffering, but begin your practices. And as you begin to practice, the quality of your desire will change. So a person may say, okay, God, I am praying that I want my son to get a better education or better money. So, okay, you begin from that. But gradually, if you then stay with prayers, maybe the quality of your prayers can change. So there is no reason, one needs to begin from where we are. We
Mm,
can't begin from Mount Everest.
right.
And some people right at birth, like Krishnamurti or many other people, right at birth are at a different level. For
Definitely.
example, the Buddha also had to have many lifetimes. So each time he came at a different level. So right at birth, you can, if you look at any 10 kids, guaranteedly you will see they're all at different levels. So, but we need to begin from wherever we are. Completely selfish, self-centered. Okay, so that's where I begin from.
I
And
guess there's no
slowly,
other place to begin.
yeah, and slowly, if I stay with some other practices, a little shift takes place. Now, I actually have often even written about the stages of the journey. There are many stages of the journey. Ultimately, one has no, one is not stuck with the aim or destination, but just interested in the journey.
Yeah.
Because the aim is still being created by my mind. What is God? I don't know what God is. What is nirvana? I don't know what it is. So ultimately, just the journey,
Mm.
not the destination.